I think we need to talk about it as a neighborhood. This is really the first time we've seen it. Again, I want to, refer you guys to my note, but I know one of the things that Aaron originally told us at the meeting was he needed $1 million to get the building back into shape to get it livable. And so that's why he needed those 17 units to provide income so he could get that $1 million. So I'm not sure where that money is coming from now, and maybe it's none of our business, but it's just something to think about. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Who would like to go next? Yes, please state your name and address.
My name is Michael Nelson. I live at 3418 Harriet. I just wanted to talk in support of the project, in supporting the change from R2B to OR1. Given this development giving the development this zoning option will give it added flexibility to be able to be a more successful project. I think speaking to the difficulty of rehabbing a structure of this vintage and of this use into residential, any other flexibility they can have in a way to keep it going would be greatly appreciated. While the zoning change, while it's not fully consistent with everybody directly around it, there is like uses very close to it. It's like a block away on Lindale Avenue. There's a similar use in terms of a dentist, and it was a dentist, now it's a barber, so it's been added traffic and commercial use there for quite a long time. Also, in regards to the variances on the corner, I would ask that you support the variances. The addition of the public plaza or extended stoop, however you want to call it, on the corner would allow them to keep a better eye on the park. There's been comments about crime not being seen very well in the park, but having people living there in the building and occupying that corner would actually go a great way to help monitor that. In terms of the idea that this is the first time we've seen the project, this might be the first time that we've seen this iteration of the project. Aaron and Karen have been involved in a very extensive process with the neighborhoods since last summer, where unfortunately they've been subject to, or we've been subject to the messy process of design and development, where you see every single little change that happens during the whole process. And Aaron and Karen have been very forthcoming in their presentation of all their plans, and I would agree that this has changed extensively from the very beginning, and that there has been extensive public engagement on this project. Also, in regards to the parking, I walk generally from Lake Street to my house on Harriet most weeknights. Yes, when there's a kickball game going on at the park, parking is at a premium. Most nights when I walk along, the entire side of the park is open. The entire east side of the park is open, and other spaces in the evening. So while parking is tight in our neighborhood, I would say that it's not impossible. And as someone who has rented in the neighborhood up in the wedge, where parking is way more tight, walking a few blocks is usually not a major problem for someone who's renting. Saying that, I would encourage you guys to approve the zoning change and also approve the variances. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on this item? Yes, please state your name and address.
My name is Stan Searson. I live at 3233 Garfield, up the street from here. I live with my wife and 2 children, and I'm excited about our new millennial neighbors. I'm sad they have to work. However, I agree with the staff that the variances are out of character. No one believes that the steps to residence are public space. It's just not how we live. We don't sit on other people's stoops. So I don't feel like that is a valid public space. It's very difficult to use. You would feel exposed and in someone else's sort of apartment. Very strange. And also, I wonder about this zoning has to go to business. It seems like actually what he's looking for is more residents to further the needs for density in the city. It seems like rezoning to residents, a higher density of residents would be a more appropriate use for this space. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please state your name and address.
I'm Frank Alarcon. I live at 3455 Blaisdell Avenue. I just moved into the neighborhood about 4 months ago after serving a couple years in the Peace Corps. I just want to speak in favor of the project. I think, as a young person, I'm 24 years old. I'm a renter. I'll probably be a renter until I'm in my 30s. I would love to see more opportunities for people like me to live in the neighborhood. I feel incredibly lucky to live in Lindale, and I think we should jump at the opportunity to turn, a kind of derelict parcel into some housing for, young people, young couples. And so that's why I support the project. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, in the back. Please state your name and address.
My name is Steve McHenry. I live at 3220 Harriet. I also have 2 small children. We go to the park all the time. It's kind of a tough intersection there with parking, sight lines, everything else. Everything I've heard here is kind of crazy. I'm very impressed that you guys are able to do this day in, day out, week in, week out. So thank you for that. I've heard this presentation multiple times, probably 4 times. 17 units, office space, public community space that might have a membership fee. I've heard that we don't need more than 3 parking spaces because everyone bikes. I bike to work every day. I have 2 cars. I have a garage where I put my cars. Also, it's just one of these things where when I hear that there are 2 phases to a project, but then we hear phase 1 now presented, I realize I can come back in a few years and I can say I don't want phase 2 to go forward. But as far as phase 1, this seems like an awesome project. I mean, bravo to an architect. It looks really cool. I'd love to save this building. But as a residential building, not as office space, not as something else that can transition into some sort of commercial space. We have a real strong community, and anyone that has said that they're in favor of this, if you look at their address, they do not live within a couple blocks of where we are. So I looked at where people live and who's talking, and the people that are for this don't live near Garfield and 33rd. The people that are against this live on Harriet and Garfield and 32nd and 33rd and 34th. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please state your name and address.
Thank you. My name is John Megan. I live at 3228 Harriet Avenue South. I've been there for 34 years, and I relish the chance to say to City and its staff, I think they did an excellent job of reviewing the presentation, and the recommendations are spot on. So I just love to be able to compliment and say it's great to see our taxpayer dollars doing a good job. The bottom line is that as it's been presented, this is a good idea, a nice plan, but what we worry about in the neighborhood is that once the zoning changes, what conditions are there that the other components of this plan will actually be what's executed? I would say that I am personally very suspicious of the push for an OR1 designation, because with what little I know about commercial real estate or home values, the one workspace that's part of this plan should not significantly change the financial pro forma for this building. And I think that the arguments for making a community space or a community resource for copy machines is weak at best. This is what makes me suspicious. If Mr. Parker has not purchased this property yet, does this open the door for a developer's fee to acquire the property, give up on these plans, and then sell it to somebody else for a higher price? And then the neighborhood starts over with someone who has an OR1 designation that can push to the max what's being presented, so that what we end up with is not the plan that we see here today, but the plan of the next developer who actually has the deep pockets to make this happen. We know this building can't be just a 2-unit duplex. It has to be changed. So, I understand the comprehensive plan. I think the recommendations are spot on. But somebody should be able to protect the neighborhood, that what we are supporting in this package is what we receive as a package, and that we don't just turn over the designation to somebody who then changes everything that's been presented in front of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, next speaker. Over to you.
Colleen Convey, 3315 Garfield, so I'm one of the neighbors that lives near it. I want to say that we really have looked at this plan a lot, and as you probably know from your notes, the neighborhood has resoundingly said no to this. And we did it at a standing room only neighborhood meeting, mostly because of the zoning. We don't need it to be rezoned to commercial. We are off of Lindale, which is a very fine commercial area. We're off of Grand, which is a very fine commercial area. And what's the beauty of our neighborhood is that we have residential space that is residential, and we have commercial space that we preserve for commercial use. And so just throwing commercial in the middle of our very small residential space jeopardizes the commercial corridors, and it jeopardizes our residential space. We have voted to say no to this because of the zoning variation. We don't need it. The public space we have, we don't need a privately held public space. We have a beautiful public space in Painter Park. We have a park house. We have many public spaces. We don't really need someone to come into our neighborhood and give us a public space. We don't want the rezoning. We want it to, we love the building and we love it to be residential. So if it was all residential, the neighborhood would be fully supported. The rezoning is a significant change, and it will be a significant change for our neighborhood. We've done a lot to create our neighborhood, to bring our neighborhood back. We really want zoning to protect us. That's why we have zoning, and we want you to protect our neighborhood.
Next.
Hello, my name is Bryce Peer. I live at 3224 Harriet, so I'm just across the alley and down from this property. I first want to say Lindale has no lack of affordable housing units, either rental or for ownership. We have lots and lots of $30,000 condos, et cetera. So if people are looking for density units to own or rent, we have them already. Furthermore, although the currently submitted development plan for Mr. Parker is reasonable for the lot structure that already exists, Mr. Parker has publicly and privately shared at least 6 different iterations of his plan. These plans have varied from 4 units to 17 units in 2 large structures, which he proposed to the Neighborhood Association this fall, and which the Neighborhood Association voted not to support. In every conversation about his plan in the past year, Mr. Parker has stated that there's no possible way to make the project work financially without additional units over the 4 proposed now. He has frequently referred to creating 4 to 6 units in the existing structure as Phase 1 and an additional building of more units as Phase 2. If Mr. Parker is granted the OR1 zoning change, there's little to nothing the neighbors or neighborhood would be able to do to prevent the second phase of development from happening. The co-working space in this plan is actually designed as a 900 square foot residential unit. And Mr. Parker has stated in the past that if the co-working concept does not work out, that they will rent the unit out as such. This shows that an R3 rezoning, which would limit the future development of the lot to 7 units, is a viable alternative to the requested OR1. In addition, a change of zoning is permanent. If the developer requesting this change does not yet own, the developer, Mr. Parker, does not yet own this property. If the OR1 zoning is granted and the sale falls through, Xcel Energy, if I'm not mistaken, would have an 11,000 square foot lot that would become much more valuable to them and attractive to other developers who could build the exact type of development the Lindale Neighborhood Association opposed when it voted on the developer's larger plans this fall. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And next speaker. Yes, please state your name and address.
Hi. Bob Weedman, 3233 Harriet, just about a half block away from the site. This is not the plan that was presented to the neighborhood group. The plan that was presented to the neighborhood group was 17 units. Compared to this plan, Mr. Parker might as well have presented a ham sandwich. This is not what we discussed. If there's any kind of a process here that involves neighborhood involvement, this is not what we talked about. Our main concern here, neighbors that you're hearing from, is that this is basically a bait and switch. Okay, you guys are seeing a 4-unit development. And, you see all this, there's discussion about parking, right? Well, there are 4 units. How much parking is that? Mr. Parker has presented 17 units with 3 parking spaces. That's what he presented to the neighborhood group. Once the zoning is changed, there is nothing that will keep him from building what he says is phase 2, right? And phase 2 is the building of the second building, which basically takes up the entire second lot. There's no green space. There's no, open area. There's no community space. Maybe it's not. Maybe he's, he has said in these meetings that there's no way that he can financially do this. The numbers don't work without the 17 units, right? So I hope you'll ask him what changed, because, frankly, it's looking like a bait and switch to me. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is there anyone else wishing to speak on this item? We really should just give everyone one opportunity to speak. If there are none, I'll close the public hearing. Maybe, Lisa, do we know if the presentation ever came up, if there's anything the applicant wanted to add? Okay. All right. Commissioners, are there any further questions, or would someone like to start us off with a motion? Commissioner Bender.
Thank you. I just had some questions. I wanted to make sure that, so this rezoning is just for the one parcel, not for both. Is that correct?
It is just one parcel. It's the size of 2 typical lots, but it's just one parcel. That's 11,000 square feet.
Okay. So the rezoning does include the site that is a vacant space.
Correct.
Okay. And then I wanted to understand, we had some dialogue previously about the rezoning, which again isn't a quasi-judicial application, unlike variances and conditional use permits. And I also connected with the 8th Ward Council office about that. And so I wondered, you had helped me understand the differences between R2, R3, and OR1, because I did understand that there was some concern from the neighborhood about the OR zoning classification. So my understanding is that the building would be allowed. There are no real bulk differences or setback variance differences between those two zoning classifications, and that if this was rezoned to R3 instead of OR1, for example, that the difference would be the co-working space would not be allowed. Is that correct? Or could you talk more about those two zoning classifications?
Sure. So between R3 and OR1. So the main form difference for buildings between R3 and OR1, obviously the use difference is the major difference between the two. But the main form differences are if you had a multifamily dwelling in OR1, that would have a maximum floor area ratio of 1.5, whereas in R3, it would have a maximum floor area ratio of 1. The difference between the setbacks are identical between the side yards and the rear yards. However, the front yard requirement is 20 feet in R3 and 15 feet in OR1. So those are the only differences for form. As far as the minimum lot area requirements, R3 would have a minimum lot area requirement. So that would be 1,500 square feet per dwelling unit, which would mean that the site could only have the maximum of 7 units without a lot area variance. However, OR1 does not have that similar restriction of minimum lot area. So those are the differences.
Thank you. And then, is there any way for someone to use, so if it was zoned R3, is there an opportunity to use that space at all as like a home office, or for that space to be available to the residents of the building? I understand that it wouldn't be able to be used as a co-working space, but is there any flexibility within the R3 classification to still have some kind of business there or not?
The city does have regulations for home occupations, and so there's certain restrictions about how many people are coming and going and other regulations, but that's basically, people can also run businesses out of their homes, subject to certain restrictions.
Commissioner Rockwell.
And just a quick follow-up. So the co-working office space would not be allowed even under a variance. That's correct? In an R3.
Correct. So an office is a prohibited use in residential districts.
Right.
Correct.
Okay.
So there wouldn't even be an option for a conditional use permit.
Well, yeah, no, I know there's not an option for a conditional use permit, but you can't seek a variance either.
No, there are no use variances.
Right. Okay. Sorry.
All right.
So do you have a sense of how much? So I'm not. So in 900 square feet, how many sort of office spaces one would be able to fit in that amount of space, or?
Yeah, so a 900 square foot space, if you can imagine, it's kind of a typical one-bedroom apartment. The floor plans were not extremely detailed, but it kind of looked like one conference room and maybe a couple different office spaces, and it sounds like a copier. And so it's a fairly small unit. I should also note that it's because it's under 1,000 square feet, it has no parking requirement.
And Commissioner Bender, you had a question for the applicant. We can.
I wanted to ask the applicant how you would use that space if we rezone to R3 instead of OR.
I'm sorry again.
If the Planning Commission or the Council approved of rezoning to R3 instead of the OR zoning, how would you use that 900 square feet instead of for a co-working space? And is that part, it's hard for me to imagine that that's helping the project pencil with that small amount of space. So it seems like an amenity, and I don't want to question sort of your motivation about why you're doing it. It sounds cool. But I do understand, particularly since the zoning carries to both spots, and if there is an intention to continue with future development, it's worth considering. Is the OR zoning appropriate?
We think the OR is appropriate because first of all, in order to make this property viable at all, we have to have historic designation. If we don't, it doesn't work. You go through and you try it this way and you try it that way. I have to say, well, let me answer your question first, because, or maybe that's all. Let's just answer the question. But, we think that that sort of co-office space is something that's very appropriate for that location, because there are lots of other small commercial properties all the way along that street, as I indicated before. We have heard a lot from the neighborhood, and we've talked to a lot of people in the neighborhood who do support this project, people who live within blocks and would use this co-office, co-working space. And we think the other thing is that because of the monumental character of that entrance, it really demands more of a public kind of expression, which commercial provides. The houses are accessed from the back. You go up that ramp on the back. Access to the houses is in this little box here, going up the ramp. This is the entrance. Is the entrance to the co-working space, and we see that as being really two different things. It's pretty important. The OR1 just recognizes that, and it is pretty important to what we want to do. So we think that it's that's an important piece.
Mr. Wittenberg.
Thank you. Just to remind commissioners, there is a table in the attachments that makes it clear that there are a very limited number of commercial uses allowed in OR1. A former city council member used to say that OR stood for overly restrictive, and the OR1 is particularly restrictive. You can't open a general neighborhood serving retail sales and service use, so nobody will be selling music or clothing or hardware or anything from a retail store. And OR1 is simply not allowed. You need the OR2 in a mixed-use building to do that. So just be cautious of thinking of OR1 as a commercial district, because there are very few non-residential uses actually allowed in the district.
And I did read the zoning book to figure that out, because we did. We have, you've heard that we presented 6 or 7 times to the neighborhood, and I'm really not a masochist. But the reason is because we wanted to engage the neighborhood in this. We thought that we would have partners in doing this, and we shared probably more than we should have. We shared financials with a small task force that was put together by the previous executive director. The people that understood real estate supported the project. The people who did not support the project. And we have come back, all these times. Do you like this? Is this okay? And so on and so forth. The bottom line is that, they don't. There are a number of people who do, and the housing committee actually voted in favor of this project. So,
Commissioner McGreen.
Yeah, and so just to be clear, I mean, the things that were presented at the neighborhood meetings a year ago really have no bearing on the applications that we're looking at right now. I mean, we have an application before us. It is legally binding and enforceable and all that, so I guess I wouldn't worry too much about that part. I did have a quick question for the applicant. I'm looking at the corner here, sort of this big plaza area, which, I guess I'm wondering what all is going to be there. I mean, I'm a millennial. I don't know. I don't know if we're just going to have I don't know if we're, vans there all. I don't know. I just see that kind of just being like windswept and empty a lot of the time. And so I'm not really, if you maybe did something there landscaping wise, or if you'd be open to I wasn't at committee of the whole for this project when it did come up some number of months ago. And I just see that kind of being empty, maybe a tree or something in lieu of that would be easier, and then you wouldn't even need the variance.
It's an excellent point, and it needs to be designed. It hasn't really been designed yet, except for the stairs reaching out. It's actually where we are at this point is gestural, and I didn't want to put the time into doing that, although I have. Into actually doing the design until we were sure we were going to move forward with the project. But yeah, absolutely. It needs to be programmed properly. It needs to be designed properly to have, the sorts of amenities that, people, after a ball game might come across and, and hang out and watch from behind the backstop or whatever. People that, I lived in New York for a long time in a former convent across the street from a church, and all night long with the windows open all summer long, we would hear, couples sitting on the stairs on the other side of the street and doing that. Now, people say that nobody sits on residential stoops, but the building directly across the street from this property is, more often than not, when I go by, somebody's sitting out there talking to somebody on that little stoop that's there.
Mm-hmm. And so, sort of going on that, maybe a question for Mr. Wittenberger for staff. I think the applicant had said that they're still working on some of the design details before going ahead with site plan review. But is it sort of odd that we're not doing that concurrently, or is it just because it's a small project and so we wouldn't see that? So it's sort of hard to maybe put conditions on some of the variances without seeing ultimately what this is going to look like when it gets built.
Correct. So the project actually doesn't require site plan review because it's only 4 units. And I guess that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
But further, correct, the plans are not fully developed. Any large or any significant changes would require coming back. But they're generally kind of more conceptual drawings than you typically see, but they're good enough to come.
Yeah, that answers my question. Thank you.
Commissioner Cronford.
Yes, I'd like to make a motion.
All right.
I'd like to make a motion to approve staff recommendation for the rezoning from R2B to the OR1 district.
Is there a second? We have a motion and a second on approving the rezoning. Is there any further discussion? Commissioner Carr.
Yeah, I'd just like to speak to my motion for a minute. This is a very unique project. It's a neighborhood landmark, either officially or unofficially. The National Night Out that I walked past last fall is right here. This is a very public building. It's a kitty corner from the full neighborhood park. It's extremely visible for Lindell Avenue. In fact, I was driving past it yesterday. Well, I drive past every day. And saw the orange stickers on the door. And I'm going, 20 miles an hour, not looking where I'm going, but knowing that we were seeing this, that this building is very much anchors the corner of that large full block public space. So while it is in a raised, it's a mixed neighborhood. There's single family houses, there's apartment buildings. I feel this, there's as staff's laid out, the policy in the comp plan, clearly support small businesses and business incubators and a whole slew of historic preservation goals as well. So I think that this project has lived up to that policy guidance.
Commissioner Rockwell.
Yeah, I just want to speak very briefly to it as well. I will support the motion, but only after Mr. Wittenberg's encouragement to look at what OR1 actually is once again, which I'm looking at in front of me. And it really doesn't allow for businesses. It allows for early childhood learning center, community garden, that some live performance space, stuff like that, office. And there are child care centers sprinkled throughout the neighborhood. I live in Lindell, so this is my neighborhood, and this is my park, and I'm there many, many times a week with my child, and I now